Hi, it's Miss Parrott, and this video is the fourth in a series covering Chapter 6.1 from Principles of Life, second edition. Chapter 6 is all about the pathways that harvest and store chemical energy. Follow along with me in your book as we look at the last part of section 6.1. So this section is all about chemiosmosis, and we're going to look more deeply into what that means. But in the big picture, chemiosmosis has to do with all of this that we kind of just looked at in section 6.1c. If you haven't watched that video, take a look at it before we move forward. In cells, energy is released by catabolism, right? Catabolic energy is released by oxidation. Oxidation is losing, so when we lose electrons, energy is released. And it's trapped by the reduction, right? Reduction is gaining. Reduction is gaining. By the gaining of electrons in coenzymes such as NADH. And energy for anabolic processes, anabolic synthesis, you're sticking things together, is supplied by ATP, the energy molecule that does work and is a result of cellular respiration. The process by which we combine these two ideas is called oxidative, right? Oxidative coming from right here. Oxidation is losing electrons in order to phosphorylate, which means add a phosphate, right? So this oxidation is losing electrons from NADH, is going to allow us to phosphorylate in order to form ATP. Let's look at how that's done. Here's our NADH. Right? It is a reduce coenzyme. Reduction is gaining. It has electrons in it. And as it moves through this system, so it is reduced already. And now oxidation is losing electrons. So we're going to oxidatively, so we have electrons driving this process. And all these hydrogen ions, these protons, are going to move through this protein called ATP synthase, which makes sense because it's synthesizing ATP. And we are, now this is the important part, adding a phosphate to adenosine diphosphate to make ATP, our energy, right? So oxidative, that's this part, oxidation, and then phosphorylation, right, is this part where we are adding a phosphate to make ATP. Here it is in a written out chemical equation, right? The oxidation of, right, oxidation is losing electrons of NADH, boom, there it is, it's losing this electrons. And now with this energy, we're going to phosphorylate ADP. We're going to add a phosphate to form ATP, our molecule that can do work. Now, we actually do all this through a process that we call chemiosmosis. Now, if you recall, osmosis itself, right, is the movement of water molecules from an area of high concentration to low concentration through a semi-permeable membrane. But this time, it's not water that's diffusing through, it is protons, right? It is H+. And so that's like a chemical, so it's chemiosmosis, not like watery osmosis. And this is the diffusion of protons, right? Protons are those H+, which were a result of breaking up a hydrogen into an electron, and a proton, right? And we use these electrons from NADH to go through the electron transport chain to pump all those H pluses up through proteins in the membrane to make a proton gradient, right? We have a whole lot of protons up here, but not very many down here. Because of oxidation, oxidation is losing because we lost electrons from NADH. We had the energy to pump these protons up here, right? And now we've established what's called a proton gradient. Those protons are going to flow through ATP synthase in order to make ATP. There it is. Here's a larger picture of that. Oxidation of NADH. And there's another thing called FADH₂, but it's the same idea, right? The electrons give the energy to let the hydrogen ions diffuse through. We've established a proton gradient just like any other concentration gradient. We have a high concentration of protons. They move through, right? They go down, down, down this transmembrane protein called ATP synthase. They go out here. And this, it's kind of neat because it takes this protein and it actually moves it. So it's almost like a water wheel, right? Like if this were water and it were moving, it actually turns the water wheel, which gives the energy to, if it's a water wheel, to make electricity, but in our case, to put ADP and phosphorus together, phosphate, to make ATP. The protein itself, we're going to get a more detailed picture in a second, is called ATP synthase, right? And it's got two subunits. It's got the H plus channel, right? The channel protein that the protons are going to move through. And then the F1 part that actually has active sites, right? Just like any other protein or enzyme, there's an active site where the action happens, where ATP synthesis is actually going to occur. So there we go. A deeper look at the chemical structure of ATP synthase. This is where the hydrogen ions go through the channel, the F sub 0 unit, right? And then this is the part that actually turns, and in turning, phosphorylates ADP into ATP.